Hey guys, Lightning here, back with another video, and today I am doing a Christmas card. So I looked on the web, I saw this picture and I really liked it, and I really liked how it had the words and the Christmas tree behind it. So today I made this card. I do want to mention that I did make this, or I recorded this video in like November before Christmas, and I'm just now getting around to being able to edit it after Christmas, so right before New Year's. So hopefully I can get this out before Christmas season kind of thing is over. But yeah, so sorry about it taking a little while. But as you can kind of see, I did the baubles. I put a little ribbon and then I put them on like this rope chain. And I did draw it on camera. As you can I don't normally do this because I do usually do a lot of erasing, and that takes a lot of time. But I wanted to try it this time and see what you guys thought. And now I also made a little bow because I felt like the card itself didn't have any kind of garnishing, that it needed something. So, and then like the ribbons on the side didn't really do it justice. So I wanted to do this little bow, and I was gonna do it in like a red color to match the kind of colors bubbles. So I used my Pit Artist pen from Faber-Castell to outline all of the lines I'd previously drawn, and I went over and just went over the lines I previously did. And I like this pen because it has a very fine brush, so I can get into much smaller areas. So it makes it, and it also a brush tip, so it means it's good for lettering. So when I'm ready to try and do brush lettering, I can practice with it. So I did do the rope in kind of like the braided style. If you see ropes, there's like two major styles. It's like the twisty style, and then there's also the braided rope style. So I did kind of the braided rope style in this one. With the bow, I wanted it to pinch a little bit in the middle, because when you're trying to make a bow with ribbon, if you've ever tried and done that, it doesn't always turn out perfectly. So I kind of tried to mimic that. So then I went in. I have my Spectrum Noir marks, and I have the OR, which I consider to be like a crimson, like light red, because it's a super dark orange, but it's kind of more on the red side of things. But I wanted that orangey yellowish tint, as if there was a yellowish light. So you see the markers I have here are OR1, CR7, CR9, DR2, and DR4. And I use them in this order because that's the order of light to dark, which is how I tend to like to shade things. So I start out with the OR1, and then I use CR7, which is coral, which is a more pinkish marker, but it's very similar to that OR1. So I use that to basically create a shine where the top of the bauble is, and I use the other four markers to also help create the depth of that. So then I use my blender to increase that shine and put a little bit of additional shine underneath the J. Then I went in with my greens. I have LG3 of my spectrums, YG25 of my Copics, and YG17 of my Copics, as well as DG3 of my Spectrum Noirs. So I used these markers to, again, create the same shine kind of gradient effect as I did with the first one, basically laying down the base color of LG3, and then using YG25, YG17, and DG3 to darken and create that shadowing effect. I also took care to go around and make sure that inside the O was also covered by this, because unlike the J and the Y, it does have a central space that if this were a green ball with white lettering on it, it would have this kind of effect. I used the blender again with the spectrum R's to create that shine above and underneath the O as well. Next is the blues, where I used my Copic BOO, BO2, and B24 to create a similar effect in the blue. Again, starting with the lightest color, I created a base color, laying that down everywhere, and then used the darker colors BO2 and B24 to create, again, the shine and the gradient that I had created with the previous pieces. And again, I did use the blender. I did use my Spectrum blender because I don't have a Copic one yet. But I used the blender to create that white section, that white lighter section there, above and below the Y, as you can see. So then I finished the joy. I went on to do the rope in a GB6, GB7, and GB8, both being golden brown. And then I used my blender to blend those out. And then I used the GB6, 8, 7, and 8 again to create the gold at the tips of the Christmas tree baubles. And then blended those again. Then I went in and used the orange and red spectrum to make the ribbons have a reddish coloration. I did some shading using the darker colors as well as with the lighter color to create that kind of gradient effect that you would get with the lights and shadows of the twisted ribbons as they are portrayed in this image. Then I finished that part of the card. I went in with the OR1 again, or OR3 again, and creating that light orange coloration on the bow. And then I went back over it with the CR7, 9, DR2, and DR4 again to create that gradient shading. As far as shading goes, I followed the contours of the ribbon and the bow, making sure to add an additional shadow under the sides of the bow, where the bow would be casting a shadow on the wrist of the ribbon and along the creases in the bow that would have been in shadow as well because of the folds, to try and create that folds, that idea of having a fold there. So I did go over that with up to the DR4, trying to really get those lines to show as if there were really actually creases there, when obviously it's a flat piece of paper. Then I just went back over and blended it out. I used some more of the lighter color because I felt like it was a little streaky, and I wanted to get rid of that to a greater degree. And then I went back over it with the darker color again to try and blend that out to get it to more smooth gradient of color. That done, I did go back with the blender, adding some lineage to the sides and some lines to make it look as though the bow was reflecting light from some unknown source. You can see that I did the lines over the two sides of the bow. That was kind of just reflect the light. Now I tape down my watercolor paper, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out the bow and the joy, and then I'm going to do watercolor tree on the watercolor paper because I like how watercolor looks, but I wanted the detail of the marker for the joy and the bow. So I'm going to make the tree on the watercolor paper and then paste on the joy and the bow and do it so that it basically is a 3D card, and it gives even more of that sense of depth, in the sense that it is actually a 3D bow and not just paper again, which does add a neat effect, especially if you do want to try two different mediums, but you don't want to do them the same thing. For example, you can't exactly do marker on watercolor paper, but and you can't exactly do watercolor on cardstock, which you would do marker on. So combining the two mediums, you might want to combine it using two different types of paper, as you can see in this kind of example. I did use my X-Acto knife to try and get that little centerpiece out. It was a pain. It took me a while to get that to work. As you can see, it took me like the same amount of time that the entire rest of the card did, so, or the entire rest of the cutting out did, so, yeah, that was kind of annoying. In the future, I would have made the second two baubles a little bit further apart. One thing I do want to mention is that I didn't bother getting the super tiny holes cut out because the one was annoying enough to me, and instead you'll see later that I went over and I decided to instead just paint inside the holes so that it's not clear. So basically with the watercolor I decided to just go over it and make simple tree leaves, and I had 3 colors of green. I didn't bother really mixing a bunch of it. No, and this is one I did mix a lot of it. So I ended up mixing the colors to make different colors, basically to create the different shading, to make that kind of fir tree look. Although the leaves of this fir tree does look a little droopy. It does kind of give the implication of that it is a fir tree, just a Christmas tree. It's like got that green color, and it's got kind of the fur color. And I did go over it with a darker color, especially since I didn't want to have all of the branches showing and do like 4 or 5 different branches. Instead, I went and I did my 3 major branches and then gave the implication that there are on this tree. I did go back over it a few to get some detail, and then I was done. And I didn't undo the tape, and I glued on my bow and my joy. I did, of course, let the watercolor dry before I did this, but yeah. So that's pretty much it. As you can see, there I go back in and coloring the leaf holes because I'm not doing that watercolor. As you can see, it did turn out nice. It does have that 3D look from the baubles and the bow, and it makes a really neat card. Now, this is a flat card. I did not add the card part of the card where you can write inside or whatever. But if you wanted to make it into a card, you could have the watercolor. You could glue it onto a folded over paper. You could use folded over watercolor paper, but I wouldn't suggest that because watercolor paper is fairly expensive, and that would be a waste of watercolor paper. Unless you wanted a watercolor background on it, at which point that would be neat. But you can also scan it at this point and make copies of this. You can also glue it onto a folded sheet of paper. So there's many options you can do with it at this point. It's all up to what you want to do and what you think is best. But that's my side of the story. If you really liked this, please let me know down in the comments. Leave a like, maybe subscribe if you want to see more, and check out other videos that I've also done. So have a nice day, and goodbye. Thanks for watching.